Gentlemen, wherever we are tonight, on behalf of Dúchas Clonakilty Heritage, I'm delighted to welcome you to our May lecture entitled Recovering the Voices of West Cork, which will be given tonight by Dr. Damien Shields. In recent years, Dúchas have been hosts to lectures by Bob Bateman and Lucy Salyer, amongst others. Bob Bateman told the story of Clonakilty-born Captain Timothy Deasy, who participated in the American Civil War and subsequently was very influential in Famine circles. Lucy Salyer wrote about Captain John Warden, also from Clonakilty, who fought in the Civil War on the Union side as well. Captain Warden later went on to become a central figure in an attempt to land a consignment of 5,000 guns and 1.5 million rounds of ammunition in Ireland for the Fenians on board a ship called Erin's Hope. But for the Fenian Rising, but the ship, cargo and crew were captured. Beyond that, my knowledge of the American Civil War is very sketchy. To that end, we are particularly delighted to welcome Dr. Damien Shields to deliver tonight's lecture. Damien is an archaeologist and historian. He is a former curator in the National Museum of Ireland, and he has run IrishAmericanCivilWar.com since 2010. He is the author of the Irish and American Civil War 2013 and The Forgotten Irish Immigrant Experiences in America, published in 2016. He has received a PhD at Northumbria University focusing on the correspondence of Union soldiers who were Irish during the conflict. I'm particularly looking forward to hearing the contents of these letters, what they tell us about immigration to the United States, about their involvement in the American Civil War, and how it affected Irish communities in the US and back here in Ireland. So without any further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Damien Shields. Thank you, Damien.
Thanks a million, Tim, and thanks, Marion, and everyone in the Society for the invitation. And I should at the outset say there are a couple of Fenians here, but I should have put in Timothy Deasy, actually, good 9th Massachusetts infantryman. But there is another Deasy from Clonakilty that's going to be in here, a less well-known one. So hopefully you can all see the screen there. Well, I just want to give you I always set pretty ambitious aspirational aims for how much I can get through in the hour or so that we have. We'll see how we get on. The talk will be split more or less into two sections. So the first one is going to be a bit of an overview of Irish involvement in the war, and then some of the county-wide Cork contributions in terms of people who were general officers and stuff, just so you can get a bit of a feel for the wider element. And then the second part of it, and kind of the meat of it, if you like, is going to be diving down into Union individuals, families, and soldiers from in and around West Cork. Ordinary individuals, so the rank and file usually, and looking at things as Tim was mentioning in relation to the correspondence, a couple of letters that they wrote, a couple of letters written about them, and actually there's a significant amount in tonight's talk is going to be about the families, the mothers, the wives left behind, things like chain migration, what all these records tell us about Irish immigration. So we have a good bit to get through, but hopefully you find it interesting. And there's a couple of these guys who I was telling the lads just before we started, I literally only transcribed the material this morning. So there'll be affidavits that haven't been read aloud in 150, 60 years tonight. I always call this, and I always start off by talking about Ireland's forgotten Great War. The word forgotten is used too much these days. But I do think it stands and continues to stand despite the work of a number of people in Ireland. It's still pretty low level in terms of its standing in the kind of Irish psyche. And it is Ireland's forgotten Great War because, particularly if we look at Cork, there is no conflict, and this is including the First World War or any other, in modern history in which more Cork men have fought and died than the American Civil War. No conflict in which more West Cork men have fought and died than the American Civil War. There were thousands upon thousands of them. Cork, indeed, was the highest represented county of all in Ireland. During the Civil War, it had the highest population. It saw absolutely huge immigration. And you look, and again, to go back to the likes of Timothy Deasy, serving in the 9th Massachusetts, you can look at regiments like that are really Munster focused in the number of men who are in them, and it's Cork always tends to dominate. Okay, so hugely significant conflict in Cork's history. And as you'll see tonight, I argue quite consistently that our failure to realize the extent of that has kind of blinded us to the potential sources that are there to tell us about life in places like Cork in the middle 19th century, about things like emigration, because we've not seen these sources that were created as a result of the Civil War. But just to kind of give it some of the kind of top level figures, when the American Civil War broke out, there were 1.6 million people living in the United States of America who had been born on the island of Ireland. If you were walking down the streets of Manhattan, way higher figure than this. 1 in 4 New Yorkers have been born in Ireland at this time. In Manhattan, it's almost closer to 1 in 2. This isn't including the children of Irish immigrants who would have regarded themselves in many instances as ethnically Irish in these cities. So New York is an incredibly Irish city. It dominates. Philadelphia is next, followed by Boston. The numbers that you'll often see who served during the conflict, indeed you'll see it in my first book on the American Civil War, are incorrect. I have revised them, done quite a lot of work revising them. In and around 200,000 Irish-born men fought on either side during the war. There were 18 Irish-born men who became generals during the conflict, which is more than any other foreign group. And in the Union military, the Union had a rank. This is a kind of a classic military maneuver. They didn't want to promote people to the rank, but they wanted them to do the job. Or after the war, they wanted to give them a kind of an honorary title. They had this kind of thing called a brevet general, and 32 Irish-born men in the Union military became brevet generals. The equivalent of the Victoria Cross in the United States is the Medal of Honor. At least 146 Irish-born men received the Medal of Honor for action. I say at least because there's still a lot of confusion over birthplaces of some of these men. You quite regularly get men who are listed as being born in places like the United States, but they're actually Irish-born. 20% of the Union Navy during the war had been born in Ireland. Really high proportions of them from Cork, sailing tradition, service in the Navy, and an incredibly important contribution. Thousands of Cork sailors serving in the Union Navy. We'll never know how many Irish died, but if you look at the average ratios of Confederate and Union death tolls, in other words, the likelihood that you would die if you entered the service, we can say that probably in and around 25 to 35,000 Irish-born men died in the war. All right. Again, this isn't including ethnically Irish. This is just people who have been born here. So as I say, it's the largest war in history for many Irish counties, by far the largest war in Cork's history. It would have had the most impact on population from Cork. Probably you would have to go back to the wars of the 17th century, I would say, to find one that had a similar impact on the population of the counties. And I think it's an interesting question as to where it is in our memory today. But again, just to kind of fly through some of these overview things, the Union Irish then, so of that 200,000 odd Irish-born men, about 180,000 of them are fighting for the North, and we'll explore why in a moment, but about 180,000 of them serving in the North, about another 70,000 children of Irish immigrants. So these are Irish who had been born in places like England, Scotland, Wales, Canada, or the United States to Irish immigrant parents. We're in the mid-19th century. There's a lot of anti-Irishness going on. The Irish tend to congregate. They tend to kind of form enclaves in different cities, and they tend to stay very ethnically cohesive. They marry amongst themselves intergenerationally. These people saw themselves as ethnically Irish. About 70,000 of these men born elsewhere to Irish parents, huge numbers of them from Cork, are here as well. So that leaves us with about 250,000 Union men who are ethnically Irish or Irish American. There were only two brigades. So a brigade was usually an amalgamation of in and around 3 or more regiments that had around 1,000 men each in them. The Irish Brigade, the most famous of them, Thomas Francis Meagher led them, and Corcoran's Irish Legion. So these are two, and we'll be hearing a couple of men from each of these later on. So a lot of men served in what are called, what I call green flag units. This man on the right here, we'll be hearing from one of these men as well, or looking at a guy who served in one of these. This is the 37th New York Irish Rifles Infantry. So there's a lot of these regiments. So again, about 800 or 1,000 men at the start of the war. They reduced quite quickly in numbers, that are ethnically Irish. But most of these Irishmen are not serving in those units. The vast majority of Irishmen are serving spread all over the military in different regiments. So if you're looking at urban units in particular, the Irish are rural in Ireland. When they go to America and emigrate to America, they live in urban centers. So New York urban units, Philadelphian units, Boston units, Chicago units, Cincinnati, these are places where the Irish are congregating in those units. As I was saying, 20% of the Union Navy were of Irish birth. 12 of the 18 Union generals are Irish. And again, New York has almost doubled the representation of any other state. So New York is the main place. A bit of disillusionment of the war from late 1862 onwards. We won't go into that in huge depth tonight, but there was, although the Irish still continued to serve in very large numbers throughout. The Confederate Irish then, the latest numbers on them by Professor David Gleason, who's done a very systematic analysis, suggests that there were about 20,000 Irish born in the Confederate service, which seems low in comparison to the Union numbers, but it's actually quite high when you look at the Irish population in the South at the start of the war in what would form the Confederacy. It's quite a high proportion of the male men of eligible age who enlist. Because the numbers were a bit less, they tended not to serve together in as large numbers as they did in the North. There was only one, what we might term Green Flag Regiment, the 10th Tennessee Infantry, which was largely Irish men from around the Nashville area. But there were a lot of companies, these groups of 60, 80, 100 men serving within regiments that had an Irish flavor. And again, a lot of them were from urban areas. So it's no surprise that Louisiana, New Orleans is by far the biggest city in what becomes the Confederacy, and that is the state that sees by far the highest number of Irish serving in it. Units like the 6th Louisiana are, for all intents and purposes, Irish regiments. 6 of those 18 generals are Confederate generals, and it includes the highest ranking general of the American Civil War, who also happens to be from Cork, and we'll mention him again in a minute. And the work Professor Gleason has done shows that the Irish were enthusiastic to join up in the Confederate military at the start of the war, but perhaps were a bit more willing to accept once if they fought very hard, but if they got captured or were they were a bit more willing than a lot of if you like, native-born Southerners to accept defeat. It's a complex issue, a very complex issue as to why people serve in any war, and I've done a lot of work on why Irish guys serve, and we can maybe deal with that a bit in the questions. But if you want to look at it in the very base level, as I was saying, the Irish, who are largely rural immigrants out of Ireland, because they're a fairly low skill base, they tend to congregate in urban areas where they can get access to major work that require huge skill levels, often in factory work, labouring work. And they tended to congregate in those urban areas where there was cheap accommodation. And this map in 1860 shows you the population, the major cities in the United States at this period. And you can see the top there that they're nearly all in what would be the Union area, the United States, state part of the United States. And so that is why there's such a huge Irish community there on which the Union draws when the war breaks out. Again, I'm not going to dwell too long on this due to time, but there are a number of reasons why Irishmen serve in the Union. I can say now, because I have read countless letters, I've been reading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these men's letters. There are 2 principal ones as to why men fight in the Union military. Tonight's talk is going to by and large concentrate on the Union military. 2 major reasons, and they're not mutually exclusive, are patriotism towards the United States, because most Irish people, even if they had families still in Ireland, saw themselves as part of America once they land in America. It's very clearly shown in their correspondence. They feel a duty towards the country, towards preserving the United States from the threat caused by the secession of the Confederate States. And the other one is financial. There's a huge financial recession that caused by the Southern secession. Places like New York were actually completely bound up in things like the cotton trade, and an awful lot of factory workers, which had huge numbers of Irish in them, were thrown out of work in 1860, 1861, and so they needed employment. So they are the two major elements, but often they coalesce, and so it doesn't necessarily. The term I hate in reference to the Civil War is mercenary. You'll often hear this mercenary. I'm not a fan of that. It's a complex mix, but these two far outstrip any other reasons. They far outstrip any reasons you'd hear about Fenianism or anything like this. These are the two significant reasons why men serve. I'll just skip through that. The Confederate guys, the guys in the South, fight for a lot of the same reasons, if you like, from the reverse side of it. A lot of them had the same sort of view. They were invested in Southern society. The war breaks out, lest there be any doubt about it, because of slavery, the institution of slavery. I think it would be fair to say that a lot of Irishmen didn't necessarily go to war because of that, with a passionate view on that issue. Most Irish, North and South, didn't really care much. And a more complex issue that we can get into later, if we want to. But a lot of very similar reasons are driving guys into the military. Like Patrick Claiborne, the highest ranking officer, his life is completely turned around when he goes to the South. When he leaves Ireland, where his life really has been a bit of a disaster, he goes to Arkansas. He finds a community, he finds a home. He likes the people around him, and when Arkansas secedes, he goes with Arkansas. Right? So there's a complex mix of reasons why guys go. Moving quickly through some of the Union generals, and I'm not going to pause very long on these, but these are Cork Union generals. The guy on the left, Tom Smith, is from Ballyhooly, so he's not a West Cork man, unfortunately. You'll have to forgive him for that. But he is very significant. He's probably the most... he's unknown in Cork, it goes without saying, but he is probably the most significant fighting general in the Union side. He's also the last Union general to be mortally wounded in the American Civil War. He dies of his wounds on the morning that Lee surrenders to Grant at Appomattox. The guy on the right is from West Cork. He is Tom Sweeney. He is from Dunmanway. He was born there in 1820. Again, I'm not going to dwell too much on him because I want to concentrate on the individuals. But he is an incredibly interesting character. He's another Fenian. He lost his arm at the Battle of Churubusco during the Mexican-American War. He was a regular army officer, very good soldier. He commanded a brigade at the Battle of Shiloh, the first real big bloodbath of the Civil War, and has a very amusing incident where he has a falling out with his commanding officer, who's a political general in 1864, and he decides that the best way to deal with the situation is by jumping on top of him and trying to beat him up with his one arm. And that leads to him being, he doesn't see active command again during the war, but he plays a key role in the Fenian invasions of Canada afterwards. But doesn't lose his military entitlements as a result of that. So it shows you that he was pretty well respected. Really fascinating individual. And there's a good book on him if you're interested in finding out a bit more about Tom Sweeney. Great individual. There are a number of these brevet guys that I won't go into in too much detail, but they're guys that are interesting to look at. Collis there on the left, again, is one of the highest regarded Irish officers who served during the war, received the Medal of Honor, had a house in Gettysburg after the conflict. John McMahon, who was a captain at Gettysburg, he becomes colonel of the 188th New York Infantry. In many of these instances, enough work has not been done. These are some of the highest ranking Irish officers in the American Civil War. Enough work has not been done to say where precisely in Cork these men are from. That's the degree of not being looked at these fellas are at. Peter John Sullivan, another guy born in Cork, served in the Mexican War, was a colonel of the 48th Ohio Infantry. Right, so again, I won't dwell too long on any of these guys because I'm conscious of time and I want to drive on. These are the Confederate generals. Walter Payne, again, we don't know where he was from, served with the Confederacy. A deeply unsavory character, I think it would be fair to say. His family, although not him personally, had a significant slave holdings, and he was heavily involved in the suppression of African Americans in Texas after the war. Patrick Claiborne on the right, though, didn't own any enslaved people, though he did fight for the Confederacy. He would be the most famous Irishman outside of Thomas Francis Meagher, probably, who served in the American Civil War, from Ovens in County Cork, from near Ovens in County Cork, Kilumney, an incredible military commander, and got in a lot of hot water in 1864 for suggesting that the South should enlist African Americans and freedom as a result in order to try and win the war. And he was never promoted again afterwards. And he was killed at the Battle of Franklin, Tennessee in November 1864. Okay, that's a kind of a really quick dash through some of these guys. That's just some of the known Civil War Medals of Honor recipients. The first guy there is worth mentioning, Michael Ahern. Michael Ahern was never in the United States. He was unemployed in Cove when a United States naval vessel sailed into harbor. He was illegally recruited onto the vessel, which then sailed off and sank the most famous Confederate raider of the war off Cherbourg, the CSS Alabama. And Michael Ahern was one of the men awarded the Medal of Honor for those actions, having never set foot in the United States in his life, just because he happened to be walking down the street in Cove, having recently lost his job. So there you go. That's the way it can work out for you. But the stories that interest me the most are always the lower level guys, the ordinary people, the people who tend not to leave behind written records, the people who are often illiterate. And over the years, I've been trying many different ways of seeking to try and get at their stories. And you can look at these. This is like one of the Illinois regiments, the 23rd Illinois, where I was doing work to look at where men were born. And so you can see things that kind of come out here. So for example, in this regiment, a lot of Munster men, a lot of men from the West. So lots of different techniques as to how we can get at these type of guys. Looking at things like information wanted advertisements, which were put out in this period when people were seeking to get in touch with families and so on. You come across an awful lot of military ones in relation to this. You can see this one is relating to the Driscolls of Court McSherry, and it was put in the paper by 31-year-old Dan McCarthy, who enlisted in the 117 New York Infantry, which was Corcoran's Irish Legion. And he was captured in 1864, but survived until 1893. But he's looking for family who were in and around the United States at this time. But to move on to kind of some of the West Cork guys, and I'm going to move very quickly through Fenians and things like that. But the war starts at Fort Sumter in 1861, when Confederates fire on the United States garrison in Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor in South Carolina. And the fort surrenders without anyone being killed. But a 100-gun salute is being fired as the men are going to be taken off the island as part of the surrender terms. A 100-gun salute is fired at the lowering of the Stars and Stripes. And in the midst of that, one of the cannon explodes and spins all its crew in the air. Of the crew spun in the air, only one of them had been born in America. There were more Irish-born soldiers than American-born soldiers in this garrison and in the regular United States Army at the start of the Civil War. 2 of the men died of their wounds there, and they're the first 2 soldiers to die in the Civil War. And the first was a guy called Daniel Hock, who was from Tipperary, and the second guy was a guy called Edward Galway, who was from Skibbereen. And he is the second man to die in the American Civil War. His brother, this guy, Andrew Power Galway, his brother also dies. There's an obituary in the Cork Examiner relating to him and talking about his brother who sacrificed his life at the start of the war, Andrew Galway, who is mortally wounded in Port Hudson in Louisiana in 1863. So it's showing you the kind of level of service that you're getting from these men. I'm going to really fly through these because I want to get on to the other people, but you do always have to mention, and I tend not to talk an awful lot about Fenians, to be honest, because they get a lot of play and they're very interesting, but they get a lot of play. But you cannot talk about West Cork without mentioning the Fenians in the Union military, because they are everywhere. People, and an awful lot of them get killed or mortally wounded. So just to fly through a couple of them, very strong out of place like Skibbereen as well. But we were talking about DC, who I should have a photo of here, but I don't. There's a couple of great photos of him in the night, Massachusetts. But Frank Welpley is another one who was involved in the Phoenix Society. And he is killed in the war. He is killed at Reims Station in 1864. There are the Downing brothers, who are also from Skibbereen. A lot of these guys would have been friends with Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa and been involved in the Phoenix Society at the time. Patrick was publisher of the Phoenix newspaper in New York. He enlists in the 42nd New York Tammany Regiment. Tammany, you'll have heard of Tammany Hall in New York. 42nd New York was raised by the Tammany Regiment. There are a lot of West Cork Fenians go into that unit. It's not a distinctly ethnically Irish unit, but a lot of them go into it. This is their monument here at Gettysburg, right behind where Pickett's charge was. That's where they were stationed there. Dennis Downing has his leg amputated at Gettysburg as a result of wounds there. And there are letters. Actually, if you go onto my site, because I won't read it out now. If you go onto my site, there's a letter from PJ Downing written at Gettysburg talking about the men who were wounded. Billy O'Shea is a particular favourite of mine, as he doesn't get an awful lot of a look in. He was from Bantry. Billy O'Shea was one of the men imprisoned with Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa in the late 1850s. He was one of the Rossa and O'Shea and one other man were the three men who stayed in prison in the late 1850s when they were all arrested, having been part of the Phoenix National Literary Society. And when Billy gets out of prison, he emigrates. And he also ends up in the 42nd New York. Again, if you'd like to know a bit more about him, I've written an extensive piece on the site about him if you search him. But you can see what Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa says about him. Down in the bottom left, his name there, you can see his name, William O'Shea, captain. It's the second name down on the bottom left of that screen. And on the right-hand side is his headstone in Fredericksburg National Cemetery in Virginia. He was killed at the site in the center there. That's a photo I took on the occasion of the 150th anniversary. It is Spotsylvania Courthouse, where I think arguably the most savage fighting of the American Civil War took place in May 1864. It's an area called the Mule Shoe Salient, where men were effectively cheek by jowl fighting each other for a period of 24 hours. And that's where Billy O'Shea dies. But because you see this with a lot of the Fenians, I think, who've died in the Civil War never really got their due. The guys who kind of live and come back to do something from an Irish perspective do. But guys like Billy O'Shea don't. We can't go without mentioning John Warren either. I know, and I'm not going to dwell on him because you've had a great talk about him, and there's a great book written by Dr. Salyer about him. Just a photo of him taken. He was a captain in Company B of the 63rd New York of the Irish Brigade, and was involved, as Tim was mentioning at the start, in the Aaron's Hope in 1867, and in this amazing court case that revolves around American citizenship and Irish citizenship and creates this big diplomatic incident. This is a mugshot taken of him as a captured Fenian. But just a couple of newspaper clippings. You can see on the top right in 1861 when he was forming his company. He's from Clonakilty, obviously. At the top right when he was forming his company. Interestingly, then after he was out of the army, when he had set up his store, interesting one from 1864, you'll see that he puts at the top of his advertisement General McClellan, who is the general that he served under in 1862. He is loved by the Irish, this general, but there is no reason at all for him to be putting that in his advertisement. It has no relevance to his grocery shop or anything, only to announce to everybody that he had served and that he was a McClellan man. All right, so he's using his service to help with his business. Okay, right. We're into the story element of it now for the last half, the second half of the talk, and they are based around pension files, and that is where I spend most of my time. I have been lost in them for a decade and more. Nobody really looks at them; they're still completely underutilized. But the American Civil War created a colossal amount of pension records. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the pension records created as a result of our own War of Independence, our own revolutionary period, and the value and what you can find in them. The American Civil War put them to shame, the pensions, in terms of the information that you can find out about individuals in relation to them. So we're talking specifically now, obviously, about United States pensions, because Confederates were not entitled to military pensions until the 1950s from the federal government. Some former Confederate states gave them out, but from here on in, we're just talking Union soldiers. 2 million pensions given out to men who had served in the US Army. in this period, the vast bulk of them Civil War. 26,000 to Navy. The ones we're particularly interested in, 1.28 million to the widows or dependent parents of men who had served, and 20,000 to Navy dependents. By the 1890s, you could almost always get a pension just for old age, right? So there was huge amounts of money being spent. A massive proportion of the federal budget was being spent. And if you recall, I said there were 250,000 men in the Union military who were Irish American. So you can imagine how many tens upon tens of thousands of these pensions relate to Irish immigrants, right? Not looked at really, well, never looked at by Irish historians in any great degree. And they're so valuable because of the burden of proof. So if you were looking for a pension, you had to say who the person was. You had to get your friends and your family and everyone to write affidavits on your behalf, giving the story of your life. A lot of the work I've been doing over the recent years has been based on letters. It was thought that ordinary Irish men didn't have very many letters from the Civil War, but there are hundreds of them in these files because widows and parents submitted the letters these men wrote. They're rare, but they're there. Submitted the letters that they wrote to prove either that they were married to them or that if it was their parents, that they had given them money in order that they could claim a pension. And they stayed there and were preserved in the National Archives just down from the White House ever since. You get investigation files and all the way through. So you can have undertakers' bills from the 1920s in Ireland. When a pensioner dies, the American government would pay for the funeral of a pensioner. And so you have 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of a record of these families. So we'll kick into talking about a few of them. And I'm gonna kind of fly through them and just read sections of them. But the first one we have here is the O'Learys of Dunmanway. I was mentioned in the 37th New York Irish Rifles. This is a man who was a first lieutenant in there, and he was killed in action on the 5th of May, 1862, in a place called Williamsburg, Virginia. John's wife, Catherine, was living in Cincinnati, Ohio, when she applied for a pension based on her son's service. Her son Jeremiah, who was killed. And this is the type of information you get. So this is the affidavit that Catherine leaves. Catherine O'Leary, being sworn, makes oath that her name is above as written. She's 52 years of age. She is a resident of Southeast Corner 8th and Sycamore Street in Cincinnati, Ohio, and she is the mother of First Lieutenant Jeremiah O'Leary, 37th Regiment New York Volunteers, recently deceased. She was married to John O'Leary on the 10th of February 1831 in Dunmanway, County Cork, Ireland, by the Reverend James Doheny in the presence of Timothy Hennessy and Jeremiah Leary. She says that both witnesses who were present at the time of her marriage are now deceased, and she does not know that the Reverend James Doheny is still living. Her husband came to this country in 1836, and her husband died in November 1838, since which she has remained a widow. She is the mother of 4 children, all of whom are still living except Jeremiah. Their names and ages are Daniel O'Leary, age 27, a member of the 15th Kentucky Volunteers, who is married and has a family of his own. He survived the war, by the way, and died in 1926 in Missouri. Hannah O'Leary, age 31, who lives in a convent in New Orleans. So her family was actually split by the war because New Orleans seceded. It was in Louisiana. Mary O'Leary, age 25, who lived with the applicant when not working for herself, and the dead Jeremiah, who was 29. There is no public record of her marriage. She needed evidence of her marriage to prove that her husband was no longer around, so that she was dependent on her son in order to get the pension. Right? So that's the reason she's telling you all this. But it's giving you all this immigrant information that would never have been preserved. This woman was illiterate. There are no records relating to her other than this. But what we get in these is we get ideas of chain migration and step migration. So there's Charles O'Brien in 1862 says that he has known, he gives a statement saying he's known Catherine for 26 years and knew her husband John until he died in 1838, and that he saw his remains at the wake. Patrick Donovan of Cincinnati said he'd known Catherine O'Leary since 1837. Joanna Sullivan, age 660, had known her for 32 years. So all of these people are people that they had known in Dunmanway, who they also knew in America. And it's giving you these step migrants, the step migration, right? So that's just a brief example of that. We move on to the Shannons of Durras then. Richard Shannon and Joanna McCarthy, who were married in Durras by the Reverend Richard Quinn in March 1828, And their son Robert then enlisted in Mount Morris in Livingston, New York, in the 27th New York Infantry. And he died from inflammation of the bowels. Disease was a way bigger killer than battle ever was. His mother was 60, and her husband Richard was unable to work. He was blind in one eye and partially blind in the other, suffered from partial dizziness, vastly reducing his ability to earn a living. They owned no property and lived in a shanty, occupying a small piece of land which was rented to them. Their son Richard had contributed towards their support since he had been able to earn money for labor, buying them provisions, wood, and other necessary expenses. And he gave his mother about $3 per week. He only kept money for his own clothing, right? So other Irish give evidence. Isaac McNeely and Richard Burke say that they had known him before his service, that he'd been healthy, there'd been nothing wrong with him. Dennis McCarthy then who was 64, and Honora Cassidy at 52, who were in Mount Morris. This isn't a very big place, right? They say they were well acquainted with Joanna Shannon, whose maiden name was Joanna McCarthy, and with her husband Richard. They lived in the parish of Kilcrohan, County Cork. They were present and were eyewitnesses to their marriage. It was not customary among the people of that place at the time to record marriages, nor was it required by law. They removed from Ireland in the year 1845 to the town of Mount Morris, where they have resided since. Okay, so this has given us famine era immigration and step migration, and we are seeing it over a long period of time. All right, the Driscolls then of Dunamark. And here we're going to have a letter. This is a letter on the left, either written by John or written for him, which quite often happened by a mediator. But they were John and Ellen. They lived in Dunamark. They had 5 children. 4 survived to the time of the war. So one of them had died. Sorry, this is their parents. John died due to the famine. 4 of the children survived to emigrate during the Civil War. He's saving money to try and take his mother over. So in a lot of immigrants' songs and things like this, we often hear the pining for Ireland, and they always want to come back to Ireland. When you look at their correspondence, the #1 thing on their agenda is getting the people who are still here over to America. That's what they want to do. They loved Ireland. They love Ireland. They have an interest in it. They have no intention of coming back. All they want to do is get more of their family and community over. But just to read out one of these letters that James Driscoll writes from the army. Washington, August 2nd, 1861. Dear sister, I take the opportunity of writing these few lines, hoping they will find you in good health, as I am in at present, thank God for it. I had an account from a boy in the Angelica Company that you were inquiring how I was, or was I alive. Now I want to let you know I am, but I do not know when we will be called into the field again. You let me know how is my uncles and their families and all my old friends. Honora, I gave $20 to Catherine in Mount Morris to send to my mother, and I left her a note for $40 more to come direct the 6th of next May. And if anything should happen me, that I don't be back again, it is due you. Send it to my mother. Dear sister, I have soldiers' fare here. It is pretty hard, but I can stand it if the rest can. There can't a soldier or citizen leave Washington without a pass from the general of this division. Honora, you may be looking for my likeness. This is his photograph. The first chance I get out of barracks, I will get it taken and send it. I conclude by telling you to direct care of Company H, Colonel Slocum's 27th Regiment, New York Volunteers, Washington, D.C. Write as quick as you receive this without delay. I remain your affectionate brother till death, James Driscoll. Okay, so James was mortally wounded at the Battle of Gaines Mill on the 27th of June, 1862, and died the following day. The pension his mother claimed revealed the story about them. James' mother, Ellen, applied for the pension from Angelica. She was 60. And they had 5 children in Dunamark, as I was mentioning. John, who was described in the application as a poor man, had died during the year of the Great Famine in Ireland. That's about as close a reference as you'll get to somebody dying as a result of the famine in these files. They very rarely say it directly. That's about as close as you get. He dies in the famine. And that's what leads to their emigration. So Ellen emigrates with her 5 children. One of them was crippled and they had to seek aid as paupers. In the years before the war, Ellen had remained in poor and indigent circumstances, frequently reliant on public charity. But a number of her children had managed to emigrate to the United States, and her son James joined Bantry people in Mount Morris. So that's where Bantry people were all immigrating to. And so it's just giving you a flavor of the story of them going. We tend to leave everybody the minute they emigrate out of the place, but it wasn't easy for a lot of these families. All right. And it was a huge hardship. But this is what the famine wrought for a lot of them. And that's why a lot of these people were there to die in the American Civil War. I want to briefly touch on that motivation factor, and the O'Briens of Rosscarbery are probably my most favorite example of this. So Patrick O'Brien served as a fireman, one of these naval men aboard USS Clifton. His family were still remaining in Cork, so you see this a lot, where they're trying to earn enough to pay for the rest of the family to come out. He was a labourer when he enlisted in April of 1862, but was captured at the Sabine Pass in Texas in September and dies in Confederate prison, right? And his pension was actually claimed by his mother from Rosscarbery. The American government sent the money across the Atlantic. She never went over and stayed in Rosscarbery. But this is a very good example of the degree to which Irish immigrants were invested in the United States from the moment they stepped off the boat. Patrick wrote this passage back to his mother in Ireland, and he was making direct reference in it to the landlords, the family's landlords in Cork, the Hungerfords, right? And he says to his mother in Cork, "Tell Hungerford not to make a fool of himself, and that he could have a hungry hunt after my wages, even to the day of judgment, and then he would have no more of it than he has now, and that is none. Such men are no more thought of here than I am myself. In fact, a great deal less is him, and his like would get well booted here." So he's writing this about his former landlord from the deck of a Union warship. And he's telling his family, listen, don't be doing anything for them. You'll have better beds. I'm going to pay for you all to come over here. And then he gets killed in the war. All right. But important to see what they saw the hope of the United States for them. So our other DCs here, and again, I won't dwell on these too long, but another letter. John and Joanna DC marry in 1845 in Clonakilty when they emigrate to Boston. Joanna dies of consumption, so John DC is left a widower, but he enlists anyway in 1861, almost certainly partially because of financial reasons, and leaves his children with his sister. He gets killed in that regiment fighting on this street in 1862 in Fredericksburg. His children at the time, the DC children, were 14, 12, 9, and 6. Right? His sister got this letter back from his commanding officer, his company officer. Near Falmouth, December 18th, 1862. Your brother, John DC, was mortally wounded in the Battle of the 11th. He lived, I believe, till the next day and was buried from the hospital. He was as honest and brave a fellow as ever lived. I trust his orphan children will be properly cared for. You can get his pay by applying through a lawyer to the department at Washington. Very truly yours, H.L. Abbott, Captain Company I, 20th Massachusetts. And so that's the news that you get. Possibly not able to read it yourself, somebody has to read it to you. Abbott, his captain, actually was a notorious anti-immigrant. He's a very interesting case study, but he gets a lot of respect for his Irish soldiers. So he is what is referred to usually as a know-nothing in this period, who is very anti-immigrant. So you get a lot of that, a lot of these kind of clashes in the war. And I'm going through these quickly, but I'm just trying to give you a flavor. There are so many. We could literally go on for about 2 or 3 days going through Cork families of these that have been identified. The Dreeks, which is about as typological a name, I think, as you can possibly get, of Cork McSherry. And again, this is another element I wanted to just think about, the communities that are going as chain migrants. So Lislee is the name of the place given in the documents, but his widowed mother, Ellen, is still there in Cork McSherry when he goes to America. And he was killed in action at Fredericksburg as well. But this is important in relation to how people stay in contact. So she was still in Cork McSherry, but people who were in Boston who used to live in Cork McSherry are the ones who help her get her pension. So there's correspondence flying back and forth across the Atlantic. And I'm just going to read you the statement that they give. In the state of Massachusetts, county of Suffolk, we William Cowhig of South Boston and Cornelius Sexton of Boston came from Ireland about 5 years since. They're writing this in 1864. And then and there we were intimately acquainted with David Dreek, who came to the United States in the year 1860. He was then about 18 years of age. He was a labouring man, and his mother Ellen Dreek was then and is now a widow. David was her only son, and his mother depended on him. She depended entirely on his earnings for her support, which he received until he came to the United States. He came to New York and from there to Boston. At Boston, he worked at blacksmithing until he enlisted. When he enlisted, it was for the purpose of being able to provide his mother. He did not spend any money, but sent all he had to his mother in Ireland. We were very intimate with him in Ireland and also in the United States. We often corresponded with him while he was in the army. He was a faithful, steady, and temperate young man. He came to the United States in order that he could do more for his mother and intended to have her come also. Okay, so you see a lot of this in the war. Guys are trying to get money together so they can send for family. And unfortunately, when you're looking at these pension files, these men all die. That's the reason there's so much information on them. So many times the parents do not get there. I actually have a number of cases where the parents land to learn that their son has been killed in the war. So it's pretty heartrending stuff. But the level of detail we are getting here about these people is quite remarkable. Moving on, I have a couple more to get through. The O'Donohues of Beara. This is an officer, one of the rare officers we have here. Joseph Donoghue entered the service at age 21 as a captain of Company C in the 88 New York, which was the Irish Brigade. He was mortally wounded at Malvern Hill in July 1862 by a musket ball fired by the hands of one of the enemy, and he died aboard a steamer that was trying to take him back to a hospital in the north. So his mother, Margaret, was just 50 in 1862, and she applied for a pension based on Joseph's service. And she gave evidence to say she married James O'Donoghue in 1833 in County Cork, that they had a daughter, Catherine, born in 1836, that Joseph was born in 1840. But we know he was from Beara because another officer who would die himself at Antietam wrote a eulogy for him, a guy called Patrick Clooney. He wrote about how this gallant young officer came to perish on a foreign battlefield, like others of his countrymen is easily told. Some 14 or 15 summers since, a youthful mother took her only boy by the hand and leaded him away from under the shadow of the ivy-clad walls of Dunboy, the once proud citadel of the O'Sullivans of Beara, bade goodbye to old Ireland forever, taking her last farewell look at the wild waters, sunlit terraces and frowning cliffs of Bantry, and fled with her fondest treasure from the romantic wilds of Cork, away from under the English flag to see beneath the stars and stripes a free man's home for the youthful sapling of her bosom. Arrived in America, his childish days flew quickly away, and ere he had reached the age of 19, he was in the army of the Republic. To track his footprints from the day he left New York with the gallant Zouave company of Captain Thomas Francis Marr, to follow him through every stage of his short but brilliant and promising career, is more than I can dream of doing just now. Of his fellowship, I must say that, to be acquainted with him socially, to grasp that manly hand of his, to feel the pulsations of his noble heart, to know his straightforwardness and determination when he believed himself right, and to witness his manly indignation at anything mean and cowardly, makes one sigh from his heart to think that the grave has opened for one so brave. The man who wrote that letter, Patrick Clooney, as I mentioned, died. This is a painting of him done, a contemporary artist painting of him done, carrying the Irish Brigade colours as he was shot down by numerous bullets at the Battle of Antietam. He died less than 3 months after the man he was writing about from Beara in this letter. These are rarely very uplifting lectures, I have to admit. There is some great information in them, I hope you'll agree. Haggertys of Ardfield are a particularly interesting family. Patrick served in the 1st Missouri Volunteers in the Western Theatre of the War. So he was in places out in the West with likes of Grant and stuff. He had enlisted in September 1861, re-enlisted as a veteran, but died of intermittent fever in April 1864. And on the right, you'll see his grave there in Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery in St. Louis. When he died, his possessions were listed. He had on him one blouse, one pair of drawers, one valise, one gold ring, and he was due $190.55. It's interesting because one of the other, you'll see on the left here is a letter written from Clonakilty, from Ardfield, when his mother is seeking proof of the marriage. And they do eventually get proof of the marriage in 1811. His parents, Daniel Hegarty, and it's Hegarthy, it's spelled. So you're getting this differential spelling of surnames. 19th century Irish people tended not to care how their surnames were spelled. We care today. They didn't really mind in the 19th century when people were semi-literate. But they were married in 1811, Daniel Hegarty and Mary Roach. But two of the people again in Springfield, Massachusetts, who give evidence are Michael Finnerty and Jerry McCarthy. And in 1869, they said, "We resided near neighbours to Mary Haggerty and we were well acquainted with Patrick. We know that he worked for Mr. Dean and Mr. Marjoram, who were the cigar manufacturers in Springfield, and he gave his wages to his mother. He contributed to her support for several years before he went to St. Louis. He sent her money several times while he resided there. We saw his letters and know that the letters contained money." She's trying to prove he was contributing towards her support. "We were well acquainted with Daniel Hegarty, the father of Patrick, and we know that he died," this is the way they spell it. I'd be interested if any of you know this townland, Crossboy, Ireland. So they're from Ardfield originally, but it says Crossboy is how the guy spelled it. "We know he died at Crossboy, Ireland on or about the 18th of January, 1837. We know this fact by reason of having been within 1/4 of a mile of him," right? So that's how close these communities were in Ardfield, and then they are transposing themselves to Springfield, Massachusetts. So you're seeing these direct links over that are preserved because of this young man's death in Missouri. I've only two to go through now, and I appreciate I've probably gone at a rate of knots. Some of these you can find a bit more on the site, but I'm going to end with a particularly compelling letter in the next one. But I do want to talk about how it can give us this sort of longevity of a picture, not always of soldiers. So this is the Barrys of Dunmanway. And this is a story that, if you like, from our perspective, started on the 17th of September, 1862, when Dennis Barry, who was 27-year-old tailor from Dunmanway, went into Antietam's West Woods, the bloodiest single day in American history, the Battle of Antietam, in the ranks of the 19th Massachusetts Infantry, and he never came out again. He was killed in action there. And his wife, Joanna, applies for a pension. And there is all sorts of incredible documentation that this woman leaves behind. She, like so many other Irish immigrants, was a domestic servant, an Irish Bridget, as they were often called. And usually we have absolutely no information about these people whatsoever, none. But Joanna was one of the people who used to save her money in the Emigrants Savings Bank. Her modest savings, she worked as a domestic. She never married again. She worked as a domestic for decades after the war, serving other people, but saved and saved and saved and sent the money back and back and back to West Cork. She saw it as an obligation. She sent money to Cork to retrieve her nephew from the local workhouse. She sent money to Cork to then pay for his education. But even more fascinating, she didn't just pay. Herself and her husband had problems while he was still alive, but she still felt a sense of responsibility to his family. And so she sent money to them as well in Ireland. This is the extent of the money that's flowing back in. And so much so that there's a letter written in 1880. Remember, this woman's son had died in America in 1862. This is her daughter-in-law she's writing to in 1880 from Dunmanway. And she is saying, "For my part, I can only say you were one of the best daughters-in-law that ever went to America. You are better for me in the latter end of my days than all I ever had." She means her own children. "And the Lord will reward you for it, even without my prayers and hearty thanks." So this is her mother-in-law who's writing in 1880, thanking her for the continued finances she's given to support her back in Dunmanway. She'd been there and had never been back at that stage for over 20 years. So we often again think of people who have left and that they never come back. There's never any communication, never any contact. That only ever occurred if people didn't want to. There tended to be an obligation on people who emigrated to continually send money back. And it was seen like that by both parties usually as an obligation, not something you chose to do. You were expected to do it. And these remittances came in. And it's one of the other reasons I think it's important to remember what went on in the Civil War, because even though many people in Ireland today don't have direct connections, the money flowed back from these people in the United States during the 19th century. But I want to end with a pretty remarkable letter. Well, actually, there is one slide after this, but this is a letter I came across that was written by a guy called Dan McCarthy. And I don't know where in West Cork he was from. But he landed back in the 1860s, back to Cork. And he finds out that his family have gone to America without him. It looks like he'd been away at sea. And so this is the other side of the coin. He was unaware that they would leave. So it really does reveal how cruel and unexpected all of these type of immigrations could be. So this is a letter written from Cork by Dan McCarthy to his brother in America. And he's writing it on the 5th of October, 1863. And I'm going to read it out for you. My dear and loving brother, I beg the liberty of respectfully writing to you to let you know that I landed in Cork in May last, 2 years, thinking to see father, mother, brothers, and sister Joanna, knowing that Mary, Anne, and Margaret were in America. I must here say that my cousin Edmund Murphy told me that all my family were in America, and that they sent Joanna off themselves, and that my father came from America, and that he was a shocking man for cursing and speaking bad words. A problem I think that still afflicts many Irish people today. However, it was not long until my poor father heard that I was in Cork, and he came, heard that I was in Cork, and he came to see me. We had a footer together, and I wanted from him my poor mother's directions, or any of yours directions. But he told me that he did not know where to write himself, for that he wrote to you, and that the letter was sent back to him, and that he felt very uneasy about you. So I just want to pause here and explain. As I said at the start, the entire family had emigrated. But what had happened is when they were in New York, his father, who had been working as a mason, had fallen off a building and hit his head, and seems to have been, he was disabled from working as a result of it, but he seems to have had a mental disability as a result of it afterwards. And he comes back to Cork on his own, right? And is back there when his son returns. And so this is the conversation. The letter continues. My dear brother, I really believe that my poor father was not right in his head. He was as deaf as a stone, and you should write down whatever you had to say to him. I never could get the slightest knowledge from him of any of ye. He told me once that my mother was full of money, that she was with a Dutchman, which means German, a Dutchman, a very rich gentleman. He only stopped a week with me and went off to Carbery. He came back again and worked a few weeks in Cork. He went off to Crookstown, was there a few days, and he asked them to send him to his sister to Dunmanway, and they did so. He did not feel well. They never wrote to me to let me know that my poor father was ill. I got ready myself and went off to Skibbereen on the West Cork Railway to work in order to be near to him and to do all I could for him. My dear brother, I do not know what to write in this, nor shall I be at rest until I receive a letter from you with a full account of my poor loving good mother, brothers and sisters. And I trust in God that you are not broken-hearted, and that it may not come again until I see you and ye all. I trust that you will keep your spirits up, for if I was to swim across, that is if I could not go otherwise, I shall do all I can to see ye all before long, please God. It's a remarkable letter in terms of its conversational style, remarkable letter. He wrote that letter to his brother Ted, who had enlisted as a 25-year-old on the 25th of May, 1861, to 37 New York Irish Rifles. Ted had been injured at Fair Oaks in 1862, shot in the right knee and left on the field, captured, and he had refused to allow the Confederates to amputate his leg. Some comrades recovered him, though, afterwards. His leg was removed, but eventually it killed him. He died as a result of that amputation in 1863, 1 month before his brother Dan wrote that letter to him from America. So his brother was writing to a dead man when he wrote it. So a pretty poignant one. But just to finish, we often think this is a long time ago, and I will just point out, I did give a talk before on West Cork, a couple of times actually, but one time was in Castletownbere, and I would, if you look at this man on the right, I met him down in Castletownbere. This is Davy Power. Davy Power's grandfather, not his great-grandfather, Davy Power's grandfather was a Union sailor on USS Catadin, who served on the Mississippi River in the West Gulf blockade. He sailed past Fort Jackson and St. Philip as the Union captured New Orleans in 1862, left an account of his service there, and came back to Ireland and had a farm in Castletownbere, got his pension, his Union Navy pension in Castletownbere for the rest of his days. And Davy is his grandson. So it gives you an idea of just how close these people are to us. Okay, I ran a bit over, but I'll leave it at that. Thanks very much.